Hey guys, so in this video we're going to be doing a weapon ranking of all of Baal's weapons using a calculator or calculations to calculate the DPS, and we're going to be using one of the best programs written by the community. So I didn't write this program, I just want to make that super clear. It was developed by one guy, SRL, but I'll link his Discord down in the description below because that's kind of the core and spine of kind of this whole video. We use the Genshin simulator, which simulates damage done by an entire team and accounts for literally everything. It accounts for energy recharge, the damage of each skill, elemental reactions, and every passive and every effect that anyone you can think of can possibly have. It's still a work in progress, so there's probably some bugs, and it is getting ironed out, and that's what the developer needs help with from the community by writing configuration files and testing out the accuracy of the simulator so that we can make it as accurate as possible. But I'm just going to be using it as a user today, and we're going to be using it to analyze a national team rotation for Baal, and we're going to be switching up Baal. She's kind of going to be the variable that keeps changing, and we're going to be switching up her weapons and stats in order to figure out ranking for her weapons and which ones you want to use and kind of how they all compare to each other. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So first I'm going to show you how I determine the substats that we're going to use for each weapon, because as you change the main stat of each weapon, if you have a lot of crit rate with a deathmatch, then you're probably not going to need as many crit rate substats. And so here you can see the names of all of the weapons, and basically in this box I've got the number of rolls for the average substat roll you can get on each artifact. The total number we got were 24, and so all of these should add up to 24. And then here I translated it into how much of a percentage it's actually being added, because this is what we need to put into the configuration file when we run this in the Genshin simulator. Down here I've just got a little chart showing roughly how much energy recharge, attack, and crit stats each of the weapon has. So you can see if it looks very unfair for any of them. For example, the Homa has a lot of crit stats, but that makes sense because the Homa just has so many stats. It can get like a high crit ratio, and then it can use the rest of the substats to put into stuff like energy recharge or attack percent. So the idea here was that if any of these cells were very dark, then there would be kind of an overinvestment compared to all of the other ones, and what I would do is I would fiddle manually these substat rolls to try to kind of equalize it as much as possible. Some of the weapons, such as the deathmatch, have got a lot of crit rate, and so in this case it's got a little bit of crit rate here that's extra, but these two cells are kind of light green, so they're not too far off from everything else. You could drop down the crit rate a little bit, but usually investing most of your stuff into crit rate gives you the best crit rate, and crit damage gives you the best result anyways, and so it's not really a big deal as long as there wasn't any large outliers. The other thing that I was looking for is that the crit ratio should be about 0.5. So this 0.45 might not be the best, but it's all pretty close to 0.5, and so for our purposes it's good enough, I think. So basically I determined the substat rolls and ratios that we're going to use for the configuration file, and let's jump over to Genshin Simulator. So basically how Genshin Simulator works is after you run the program, you're going to come to this page, which is the home page, and what you're going to want to do is make a configuration file which specifies stats of each character and then the attack sequence. We're going to cover this in more detail in a different video, but for now that's basically all you need to know. So if I open up any of these configuration files that I had made, I made 44 because we were looking at a lot of different combinations of weapons and main stats, and a lot of them needed different substats. So it's a lot of editing for me, at least, to make all of these configuration files, but we can just pop one of these in here and look through it a little bit. So here you can specify how many iterations there are, and then I forget exactly what duration is. Read the documentation for the program in the GitHub that I'm going to link down below, and so you can see the insides of the internals of this whole program. It's written in Go, which is let's say a newer programming language, which is really great, but I'm not too good at Go, so I didn't spend a lot of time reading through it. But maybe at some point we could look a little bit through some of the code. You can do it on your own time also and see how the inside of the calculator is actually constructed. But basically we have to define all of the stats for our characters their constellations, their talents. All of this is included in it, and their attacks are kind of kept track of with frame by frame data. So it uses the most accurate frame data from Kaching mains that we can get. So there's a little bit of error that we kind of can't account for, because for example, if we use say Xiangling's E skill and it takes 40 frames to execute each of the kind of flames of her Goba, we don't know exactly when the hit lands between those 40 frames. And so there are some assumptions made, but it is as accurate as you're going to get in terms of people's calculators. Most calculators just take into consideration one attack. This one does take into consideration one attack, but it also keeps track of all of the frames and everybody's energy recharge levels, how full their burst is, literally everything, any buffs that are up. So this is definitely like the most amazing community made calculator that I have seen. Genshin Optimizer with all the artifacts is also really, really great, but this breaks down like the entire damage sequence and process, and using our configuration files we can get really good estimates for how good the DPS of an entire team is. So for this team, it's basically a national team with a Baal tacked onto the back of it. We've got a Xiangling, a Xingqiu, a Bennett. The stats here are basically from the developer because he wrote this configuration file. I didn't really mess around too much with the insides because he said he checked it and it was working for the most part. You can change the attack sequence to kind of optimize it a little bit more, and we'll look at that down at the bottom, but I'm just going to highlight the part that I was changing. So all I was doing was changing up Raiden's kind of information. So we were changing up her weapon from different weapons that were available and coded. Not all of them were coded, so I don't have the Favonius and maybe a couple other spears here and there, but I got most of the important ones. And Raiden's a little bit trivial because we have the catch, which we're going to look at how it performed in comparison to all of the other 5 stars in a second. Then the artifact set is, here it's called Seal of Installation because some of this was in development during leaks, although not really anybody was using it at that point. But this is the Emblem of Severed Fate set, and that's what the effect that this is going to kind of activate behind the scenes in the back end is corresponding to. Then we've got main stats for Raiden, so it's like your flower, your feather, and then your like whichever, it doesn't really matter which ones they are, but this is going to be your headpiece, this is your cup, this is your sands. I don't think the order here matters, but what matters is just the fact that you use the correct tag or whatever so that it gets added into the damage calculation or the stats. So in this case we're looking at attack percent and energy recharge with no cup and a crit rate headpiece. And then here we have to specify the substats, which is one of the hardest parts when you're trying to do comparisons like this, because you want to give everything a good comparison. And if you have an like energy recharge weapon or a crit rate weapon, then how you're going to want to distribute the substats changes. And so that's the part I was doing manually for each of the configuration files. Then here we've got the enemy. For our case, it doesn't really matter because we're always attacking the same enemy, and we're just trying to compare Raiden's performance with her weapon. But here you can actually change, the level of your enemy and the resistance. Maybe you're fighting a Fatui agent with Klee and you want to see how good Klee is doing. So you can change whatever, the pyro resistance for the Fatui agent and see that it's like, oh, my damage is getting cut in half. It's not great. And then here, this is probably the most important part. And if you want to help with the sim, then the developer SRL can definitely use a lot of help with this, and I'm going to link down his Discord in the description below, so definitely go and check it out there. The community is growing, there's a lot of people that are going to be using it, but this is kind of the hardest part of the sim. You have to specify an attack sequence or a priority list, which the simulator will kind of cycle through one by one and check each of them. And so for example, like if you use Bennett's burst as one of the steps, then the sim is going to cycle through this, and once it gets to that step, it's going to check, does Bennett have enough energy, and is Bennett off of cooldown? Because if his burst is on cooldown and full, you still can't use it. So as long as all of the conditionals are met, then it will activate Bennett's burst. What you can also do is you can put in other conditionals, such as when you're on Bennett, if the energy recharge of Xiangling is less than 70, then swap to Xiangling. And so you can do a lot of like fancy stuff with this, and I'm going to make another video dedicated to that, but I just wanted to show this, and I didn't write this attack sequence up, This was written by the developer, and it was kind of tested by him with in-game data, and it should have matched for most of it, so probably good enough for purposes that we're going to use it for now. So once you put your configuration file in, we're going to press run, and now we're going to view the results. So this is super cool. It gives us a damage breakdown in damage per second, basically, the ability usage, how many times each ability was used, character on-field time, and then also reaction. So this is going to be very useful later, especially if you're looking at, let's say, Venti or Sucrose with a lot of elemental mastery, how much reactions they actually do. Now if you click on each of the characters, you can see a breakdown of all of their skills and how much damage they did. So Xiangling is carrying her damage with the Pyronado, and then she's doing actually a pretty decent chunk of it due to overload reactions. And so, getting that elemental mastery on Xiangling, you can already see here, could, bump this up to halfway, definitely add a lot of damage. Once again, you need to tailor the sim to the duration that you're using it for or interested in. So for example, if you're in Spiral Abyss, you probably don't want to run it more than 1.5 minutes if you're trying to get 3 stars, and so you're going to do a lot less reaction, or you're not going to do 52 overload reactions because you're only going to use your skills a couple of times. So this is actually going to be a lot lower, but we're using the sim here for a lot of iterations over a certain amount of time, and so there's some considerations you have to take into effect, and don't just go blindly like, oh, EM is so good. You have to think of it situationally and write the configuration file to fit your situation. But Pyronado does the most damage and Kubo does the next, and she doesn't really do normal attacks based off of this priority list, which makes a lot of sense. This is the performance that you would use Xiangling in when using her in-game. So it's great. Anyways, here we can see Raiden. She's doing damage with her Eye of Stormy Judgment and her Muso attacks. Ishin and Shinsetsu. I'm not good at speaking. But here you can kind of see a breakdown of this. So anyways, what I did is I wrote a bunch of config files, 44 of them, one for each weapon and one for each combination of a substat. So there are 11 weapons and 4 main stat combinations, and then I changed the substats to fit them, and then we used basically the total team DPS, and I also kept track of how much the E skill did and how much the burst did. And so I recorded that in a table here, and then I moved it over into a visualization that we can all click and sort by and make it look pretty, basically. So for this weapon ranking, we're just going to look at attack percent right now and elemental bonus so that the video is not too long, and then I'm going to make another video where we're going to look at which main stats are the best for Baal using the results from the Genshin simulator. So what you can do is actually click on any of these graphs and sort them, and all of the data is linked, and so it's pretty cool. In this case, it just switched these two, but I'll show you later that we can sort other parts of it. So here's the list. We're missing maybe a couple spears like Favonius, but it's not a big deal for Baal because we have the R5 catch for free. So all we have to really look at here is how does the catch do in comparison to all of the other weapons. So top is the Engulfing Lightning, her best in slot 5-star on the banner. Next is going to be Homa with only about less than 1,000, only 600 damage per second less than the Engulfing Lightning. So you can see you're not getting a large increase, too large of an increase by upgrading to her best in slot. If you have a Homa, it's already doing really, really good for her. So you can definitely roll with that. Followed by the Jade, a little bit worse, it's 1,000 damage per second, but in my opinion, that's not even that much. When we're doing a 1.5 minute run in Spiral, then a difference of damage of 1,000 damage per second will come out to about, we've got 90 seconds, so it'll be about 90,000 damage. So it's, if you're cutting it close, it could help doing an upgrade like this, but, in the grand scheme of things, that's not that much. It's if you could pull off one more burst, then you'd probably cover that, or something like that, at least half of that. It does add up, but, you have to be cutting it pretty close for 90,000. I feel like I forget exactly the damage that you need for the Spiral bosses, but they do have a lot of HP, so it's, it's a little bit, but it's not the biggest thing in the world. After Jade, we've got a very close runner-up, which is Catch, and I think this is what everybody should be using. The problem with the catch now is that it's going to do very well on any character, whether it's Raiden or Xiangling or Zhongli. Potentially not Xiao, depending on what his plunge damage counts as, because he uses ultimate, but then I think he does plunge damage, not burst damage, so you wouldn't get that burst bonus. But anyone who does burst damage, the catch R5 is going to do absolutely amazing on them. And here we can see that it's neck to neck with the Jade, which has, you know, superior base stats and really good passives and everything. So the catch is probably the weapon I'd recommend, and I would not recommend rolling on her best in slot. If you do have it, you will be doing quite a bit of damage, so it will help you. If you have this weapon, I'd say definitely max out your Raiden Shogun, like get the best artifacts you can. You know, treat her well, because you want to capitalize on this as much as possible. But I don't think if you're thinking like, oh, should this be, if you're free to play and you're thinking about getting a 5-star, I don't think this is the 5-star, because you can already see that if you got the Homa instead, Homa will do a lot better on people like Hu Tao, and it only does a little bit worse for someone like Raiden. It's the second best. It's just like a stat stick. It has so many stats that it does a great job. Next is Skyward Spine, which actually underperforms Catch in this kind of scenario case, which is a little bit interesting. It does make sense that you're not getting her passive, or the passive, from the Skyward Spine at all, and so it could definitely be doing it worse. And if you do refine it, and I think you just buff the passive, so you're not really getting almost any value out of more refinements on this weapon. So I would use the Skyward on someone like Xiao, who can utilize the high base attack and the energy recharge, and can also utilize the passive effect from it. After that, we've got the Vortex Vanquisher. So what we can see is that in this configuration, we've got an attack percent Sans, and the Vortex Vanquisher already has a lot of attacks. So if you have the Vortex, you might not want to be investing so much into attack. And so in the next video, we're going to look at different main stat combinations, where in some of them the Vortex might actually do better, because what we might see is that this is not the best main stats for the Vortex Vanquisher. Next is going to be the Deathmatch. Great weapon, has a lot of, you know, crit rate, low base attack. You know, it's holding on in there, but it's not the best, you know, for this kind of energy recharge scaling build, because Baal scales off of energy recharge. The set Emblem of Severed Fate scales off of energy recharge, and so the Deathmatch is not doing the best. Next weapon is Dragon's Bane. Interesting weapon. In the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about its performance and what it's doing. But, you know, it doesn't really fit Baal. Can't really get the passive up all the time, and it's got energy recharge and low base attack. So, would not recommend. Prototype Star Glitter. Very interesting weapon, and I'm going to point out one thing about it. It's got the same stats. It's identical to the Catch, except for one thing, which is the passive. So, if we sort here by the elemental skill, we can see that these two, the Catch and the Star Glitter, are neck to neck. They're basically exactly the same. Like 4,711 elemental skill damage and 4,720. So their performance is like exactly the same. And where's the difference? Well, we can see that it's in the burst skill. In the burst skill, the Catch gives you that R5 like 32 or something % burst bonus, and that just takes it so far ahead of the Star Glitter, whose passive is for like normal charged attacks or something, and I don't think it just doesn't proc in Raiden's burst, and so you're definitely losing a lot of damage with the Star Glitter, even though the stats are basically the same, and the Cat just kind of carries when you activate your burst, and so it really fits Raiden's kit and how Raiden works. So that's why we've got the Star Glitter down here, as it's a 4-star with not the best stats, and you can't use the passive at all, so it's just not so useful. Finally, we've got Crescent Pike and Dragon Spine with kind of useless physical damage stats, which are not contributing to anything. And then the passives are also extremely questionable, because Raiden does burst damage in her burst. And so you're not getting Crescent Pike procs, and it's definitely not getting Dragon Spine Spears of X, so it's not recommended. Favonius is one spear I wish we had on this list, but we don't, as it's not coded yet fully in the Genshin Simulator. But if I had to guess, it would do something maybe a little bit better than Star Glitter, especially if you've got the refinements just from how you're gathering your energy recharge. or your elemental particles from the passive, which is useful. So I would rank it, close to deathmatch, maybe plus or minus a little bit in terms of damage. You would have an easier time getting your burst up, so it is good for that, definitely. But this is sort of the weapon ranking. We're gonna look a little bit more at this in the next video. Go check out Genshin Simulator, go check out their Discord, go check out my Discord, and we're going to be using it a lot more and probably doing visualizations like this for different team comps and different characters a lot more in the future, as it makes it a lot easier using this program, and we can definitely do some pretty good analysis with it. Thanks a lot for watching, and take care.